Hi everyone. Hopefully parents and students are able to watch this video to get a little more depth into what we covered this week for digital art, conceptual computing class at FBC. I wanted to put this together because we covered a lot of material in the class pretty quickly and didn't get into a lot of detail about some of the concepts. So I wanted to put together a little video session that will hopefully help you get through the assignment, which the end goal of which is to create these 5 materials in Blender, or something closely approximating these things. Hopefully the concepts will hold, and you'll be able to get pretty close. I'm not looking for a lot of texture because that will be another class, but the material, the coloring, and kind of the way that light affects the mesh that gets created is the most important thing. So I'll just read through kind of the notes that I have for the class. We started looking at materials, and in the previous classes about as a way to add color to our mesh. Just a nice, easy, low poly mesh. But we're going to look a little deeper and see how we can affect the way that light reflects or refracts or penetrates into our objects. And it's a fun way to add a little bit of detail to your models so that they get more than just color. They get kind of a sense of the type of material that the thing is made out of. The steps that we're going to do will set the layout for our 3D modeling environment. That's just kind of setting up so that we can get started and have everything in a way that we'll be able to see easier. And then we'll set up a nice little studio so that we can put our objects in and see the materials that we're creating in a little better way, which we did in class too, but I'll walk you through some of the details on that. And then we'll add some objects and manipulate their materials, and then we'll save it, and that's kind of the extent of what we're trying to do. One of the key things is we do want to be in Blender 2.79 at least, because it adds in one of the things that we'll be using, which is called the principled shader, and it's something that Disney and Pixar, it's based off some things that Disney and Pixar did to try to maximize the ability of digital artists to create materials that don't require a lot of work. In the past, you'd have to add a lot of different things to get just the right material. The principled shader, and as you'll see it looks large and kind of intimidating, but the things that the options that it have, you don't typically work with a lot of them. You very precise things would maybe use a few of them, but you're really using maybe 3 of the options. All right, so if you have Blender 2.79, you open it up, a new Blender file, and you'll get your typical scene, camera, object, and a light. And in this case, the easiest thing is to click on the light, hit X, and delete that, and then click on the cube here, hit X, and delete it. And then the camera, what we're going to do, and if you look in here, oh, sorry, I forgot. The first thing we're going to do is set up our layout. Doing those things is fine. I'm going to go ahead and start fresh so you can see. We'll start from the very beginning here. All right. So the first thing we're going to do is set up a layout. The main thing that we need is we need to have a 3D view to be able to manipulate where we see everything. That one comes by default in the new files. And then there's this little triangle here that if you click and drag, you can create a new panel, and this panel will just duplicate whatever you're dragging from. So instead of a 3D view, we'll go down here to the bottom left corner of this panel, and we'll select the node editor. And what this will do is it will allow us to manipulate our materials. You may get some type of panel that pops in. If you hit the N key while your mouse is over this, it'll hide and show. So if I hit N repeatedly, you kind of get that. You can make that go away. The same thing over here, there's a panel. If you hit the T button with your mouse over this panel, you'll see that one goes away. This one also has the N panel as well. So most of the panels have the same thing. You have a T on the left and an N panel on the right. And so in this case, now we've got two panels set up, and then there's one down here. Now it's a little tricky because there's scroll bars here, and they, as you hover your mouse over it, it really doesn't do anything at this point. You move your mouse down just slightly, a little more underneath, and then you can drag this up. And right now this one, if you look, is on the timeline view, and we want it to be on the node editor view, which is up here. So in the lower left corner of that panel, you select the box and select node editor. 3D view. And in this one, what we want is we want to be able to see a close rendering of how our model is going to look. And so if you hit the Z key, you'll get the ability to select. Most of the students have installed this plugin that allows you to do this kind of pie selection. And up in the upper right corner here is the rendered option. And that will give you a pretty close approximation of what your model will look like when it's rendered finally. So one of the things we talked about in class is some people would like to have their rendering down here. Some people might switch their node window to be there. So I'll do that so everyone can see. Try this out. If you like it here, keep it there. If you want to switch, that's easy enough. You go to the lower left corner again of the panel and just switch the view. So in this case, we have to kind of go back to where we were. You hit T to remove that toolbar on the left, and then Z to go to rendered, and you get the same thing essentially. So down here, we would switch this one on the lower left to node editor, and depending on how the students want to use this, how it's most fluid with them, we'll go ahead and leave it like this and see how we like it. The other thing is, typically on the rendered view, what we'll want to do is have this look at the way the camera is looking. And so the easiest way is, if you're in this view, you can hit, if you have a number pad, you can hit the 0 on the number pad, or you can go to the lower left here and hit view and go to camera here, and that will give you a look of what the camera is looking at. The other thing, and we talked about this probably from one of the initial classes, is to hit that N key to bring that toolbar out or the panel out. And in this, in the view section, there's a lock camera to view. And that one will allow you, so I'm right clicking right now, it'll allow you to move the camera, and where you move the camera, you'll notice on the left there that the camera was moving. So it kind of fixes the window to that. And that's helpful for when you're trying to move things around. Alright, so once again, we will be on the left panel here for moving things and manipulating things. But we've got our node view, our rendered view, and a 3D view, so step 1 is complete. Now we're going to set up a nice studio. So studio lighting in 3D is not hard to accomplish because you can create lights kind of at will. But in this case, we're going to remove this lamp. So we click on it and hit X to delete it. Click on the cube to delete it. We're not going to use it, and we'll set up our studio here. So a typical studio, you're going to have the camera in front. So let's click on the camera, and if you hit Alt G, that will remove the movement. So it'll put it back at the center origin of the scene, and then hit Alt R, and that will remove all the rotation. So anywhere you moved, you kind of want to neutralize all of that. But if you notice, right now the camera is actually pointing straight down, and that's not very useful. So we're going to hit the R key, and then we will type in the number 90, meaning turn it 90 degrees. But we all want to do that on the X-axis so that it's pointed essentially towards the front, or it would be looking at the front of the scene. And then hit Enter or left click, and that will fix it in place. And then we'll move it more to the left here, which would be the front of the scene, by clicking G and then hitting the Y key. And what that will do is it'll move the camera only on the Y-axis so that you can visually speaking, you can see it moving here. And so what we should see is we should see that the camera is looking forward, and as we add our things in, we'll see them come in. Now, we'll probably be moving the camera up a little bit, so if you wanted to do that now, hit G, and then the Z key to move it only in the Z axis, which is up and down in this case, and move up just a little bit, and that way you're kind of like eye height from a person's perspective. All right, so that is the initial thing of moving the camera. And then now we're going to start adding some objects and actually giving some of the objects some materials so that we can set up our little studio here. So this circle with the crosshairs in it is the 3D pointer. If I right click, you'll see that it moves around, and occasionally, for whatever reason, sometimes you inadvertently right click to do things, or you might move this on accident. To get that back to the origin, we in class, there's keyboard shortcuts for so many things. I had to look this one up. So hopefully the students felt like, you know what, if Mr. Derry has to do it, it's not a bad thing to have to look things up. So we found out Shift S will bring up a menu, and what we want to do is we want to do the cursor to center, and that will bring it back to the middle. So if we base everything we create off of the middle here, we know that they'll be roughly close to where we need them to be. So the first thing we're going to add is we're going to add a plane, and we'll hit Shift A. Oop, not in the browser window. Shift A, and we'll add a mesh plane, and that puts it here flat. And then we'll stretch it out by using the S key to scale it. And we just, in class, we kind of talked about how we can just make it roughly close to where the edges of this grid that we see are, because visually speaking, as you see in the camera, it's kind of a nice setup where you see the edge, but the back is still visible as well. All right, and so that's the first thing we're going to add. Second, two things we're going to add. So we'll hit Shift A again and add another plane. And this one we're going to rotate, so we'll hit the R key, and then we're going to rotate it on the Y axis, so we hit Y, and then we hit 90. Type 90, 90, and then hit Enter, or left click. And so what you see here in this screen is that it's perpendicular to the other plane. We need to move it up a little bit, so we'll hit G key, and then the Z key, because we just want to move it up for now, and then we will move it over, so left click when it's kind of, you can see the whole thing, and then G, and then X, and we're going to move it over to the side here. And so now you'll see it kind of showing up, and visually speaking, I'm moving it, I'm kind of moving it in this screen, but looking over here to see where it renders, and I'm going to move it so it's just outside the camera. And then I'm going to you can do this a couple different ways. You can add lights, like studio lights, in a few different ways. We did it more simply in class. We added the material to this one and then duplicated it. So in this case, we'll go ahead and do that. So as long as you have this plane selected, down here, we'll be looking at what to do down here. Now we started out without switching our render engine. In class we talked about how there's different render engines for Blender, and really for any 3D program there's different things that will do the rendering, which is how the computer deals with all the things that you're creating in 3D. The Blender render engine does not have as many options, so we're going to switch to use the Cycles render engine. And what you'll see over here is the rendered view looks a little bit different. So shadows in the Blender render engine are rendered as black, and they don't do any type of extra light in here, but the Cycles render engine does take into account things like light bouncing off of other objects. So we also, because we switched to the Cycles render engine, we'll be able to actually see a few different things down here. And so we'll use nodes, and in this case what we'll want to be, so this is looking at the the compositing layer. We want to look at the shader layer. And so this gives us these three options. We'll be dealing with two of them. One is the object and one is the world. The world being everything else that's rendered around your scene. And so in this case, we're working with an object, so we want to make sure we have the shader and the object selected in the lower left here. And then we're going to add a new material. So these are the list of materials, and we'll add a new one, and that will give us these nodes. And in this case, the diffuse shader is what we've been using. We in class we set colors using the diffuse shader, which is in the Blender render engine as well. That's just done by setting the color here. We're not going to need to use the right hand panel here because most of what we'll be doing is tweaking things in the node editor. You'll see the same options over here, but it's a little easier to visualize in this case. So if we click on the diffuse shader and hit X, it will remove it, and you'll notice that this went black. If I hit Shift A, same as in our 3D view, that's to add things, and we'll add an emission shader. So we want to emit light from these panels. And voila, there you go. You can see some light here. Now you can change the color of the light to be, we just briefly touched on that if you're in certain cases, like incandescent light is a little more yellow. If you're outside, it's a little more blue. In this case, we'll just go ahead and leave it as white, and you just kind of set it back to ones here to get white. And then the strength, we kind of want it to be well lit, so as you look here, you'll see that you get a little more light that way. The other thing is, we noticed in class that we were getting a lot of light based on what the world light was doing. So we went down here to the world shader, and we clicked on this that says use nodes. And then what we did is we set the background color all the way to black. So that gave us a little clearer picture of how much light these panels that we created were giving out. So we go back to that. You can kind of see we want lots of light coming from it because we can position our objects so that we can see it better. So once we get a good amount of light out of that, then we're going to duplicate. So we talked about this in class. In most programs you hit Control-C to copy and paste something, and Control-V to paste. In Blender we use Shift-D to duplicate, and that'll initially give you the ability to move your duplicate object around. We want to move it along the X-axis, so we'll hit X, and then we'll just kind of move it visually over to the other side, so that what we get is a decent amount of light kind of coming from both. You can also do things like move it up. So if I hit G and then Z and move it up in the Z axis, you can do things like rotate it so that it tilts down or things like that. We'll go ahead and I'm going to hit Control Z to undo that move, and we'll leave it like this so that we can see what we're doing, and we can adjust later. So I still have not moved the view here. And there's a reason for that. Mostly it's because it's not necessary at this point. But now we're going to start adding objects, so we may need to move around in the 3D view. If the students don't have a mouse, I highly recommend that they get one, because in this case, moving the 3D view around is as simple as if I hold the mouse, the scroll wheel button down, I can move around in 3D like this to really move around my scene. Or if I hold the shift key down, I can kind of pan and go up and down, and so I can position it, and then the scroll wheel will zoom in and out. And so students should be able to do that at this point. I think some of them have not experimented with that much, partially because they have laptops with their touchpads don't allow for that kind of fluid movement. Um, People with Macs are kind of spoiled, I guess, because their touchpads do that. This by scrolling with two fingers around, it will move your screen around, and then zooming is just dragging front and back that way. Um, so if we go back to where we were, let's add some objects. So in this case, since we have 5 materials, I'm going to go ahead and create 5 different objects. So I'm going to say shift, I did it again. Don't need to edit the text. I'm going to say shift A, and we'll use the monkey because that's something that Blender has that's kind of a silly thing that we can look at. Her name is Suzanne, as you'll see here. I originally thought her name was Doris for some reason. But when we created, the 3D cursor was at the center again, and once again, if you hit Shift S, you can move the cursor to the center so that you get start there for everything. But you'll notice Suzanne's head, the head is partially under the plane that we created. So we'll hit G, and then we'll hit Z to move up in the Z axis, and then we can bring the head up a little bit so that visually it's kind of centered in our view. And then we can move her to the side in a number of different ways. One of the easiest ways is if on the number pad you hit the number 7, or you go down here to view and then top, you get a nice layout here, and you can hit the G key once again to just do free movement and kind of move the head front and back or side to side. So you don't have to worry about hitting whatever axis key you're manipulating. And then we'll scale it down a little bit because we don't necessarily need it full size, and we'll kind of position it there. And then what we can do is we can actually create duplicates of this, but we'll notice one thing about this. So if we do this and then we add a new material down here, so we're in shader and object and add a new material, if we change this one, it's independent. So there are ways that if you wanted to duplicate something and have it maintain the same thing, but let's look over here. So we don't have the new material. So this gives us a good way to use the same shape but not have the same options. Now, if I duplicate it after I've given it the material, notice that it maintains that material. So, quick trick is to do this in a little more efficient way. You can give your materials names, and so down here on the bottom of the node editor, or up here on the right hand panel here, you can do the same thing. So if we look at our materials and we say, all right, you know what, I know I'm going to do 5 different materials, I can create my mirror material, and then I can create another one. I can hit the plus key or plus button here to add a new one and call this one Jello, and add another one and call this one hard plastic. And I can add another one. You can kind of see the pattern here. Something resembling wood, and then add one more for cement. Alright, so now here's the fun, like efficient thing to do is when I duplicate this one, so I'm going to have 5 different materials. I can just make duplicates. Shift D for duplicate of and just create 5. And then lo and behold, each of them has, and we can drag this down, has listed all the materials that we created for that. So currently it's using the cement because that was the last one we created. So essentially what we'll go do is we'll say, all right, this one will be cement, this one will be wood, all right, this one will be let's see, hard plastic. This one will be Jello. Alright, and then this one should go back to our mirror. Alright, And there we go. And look, it turned blue just so we had left it like that. All right, so now the cool thing is you don't even have to manipulate, you don't have to click on any different monkeys. You can actually just manipulate the material from one place, and the one that's selected there will change. And we'll see this. So let's go ahead and start with something fairly easy like cement. Now I think everyone's gonna hopefully watch this video and be like, wait, he's doing our homework for us, and that's fine. So we left click on the diffuse shader, hit X to remove it. You'll notice that both monkeys kind of turn black. They're still there, but in the rendered mode they're black. So now we hit Shift A to add a new shader, go to our principled shader, and you look at this, and if you zoom out, it's a fairly large node. And in nodes, what we do is you always want to make sure you connect the dots, and they color coordinate them. You'll see a yellow dot and a purple dot or blue. The green dots should always go together. And in this case, what we're shading is, we talked about this, we're shading the surface of our object, not the volume. The volume would be what's inside the surface. And so we'll see on the Jello that you can do some volume things there to have a little fun with it. But in this case, so our base color is white. So these are the options we'll probably manipulate. Cement is typically not white; it's typically a little gray. So we'll add that. And then once again, you can we won't be moving around a lot. So if you wanted to, you could do this and look at material here to get an idea of the color, or you can really just zoom in here and then hold Shift down and kind of pan over to the one that you're manipulating. So in this case, the cement one is this one in the back row here. And so you can look and see render wise, cement's a little bit, so if we went all the way black, he's going to be too dark. If we go just like a slight gray, and then what we want to do is we want to look at metallic. So we talked about how a true metal reflects all the light that hits it if it was completely smooth. Now that may give you a hint of what one of the other materials we're going to be manipulating, but in this case, and then roughness, so we're not metal. Roughness also dictates how much light is reflected. Now in this case, cement is very, very rough, so we'll add as much roughness as we can. So this object does not reflect a lot of light, and so you'll see it kind of flattened out the lighting that's there. Alright, and then in this case, all the other things really don't need to be set. So I would say that from the perspective of the assignment, cement, I would say this one, we did base color and we did roughness, and that's really all you need to do. There's not a lot more to do for cement. Alright, and now we can manipulate, let's go ahead and look at hard plastic, which would be the middle object. So we'll scroll over here to our middle, and we'll look at that Suzanne. And as we do this, so once again, we'll do click on the diffuse shader, hit X to delete it, and then we'll Shift A, add the principled shader. Once again, connect the dots to the surface. Alright, so we're kind of back to where we were. Alright, so hard plastic, the base color doesn't matter as much, but hard plastic is typically pretty shiny, and so we'll move the roughness all the way down so that light should be somewhat reflecting off of this. And then that's really all you have to do, because in this case, if you want to change, we could change it. Let's say it's what's a nice color for hard plastic? We'll do, how about a green color? So what you'll see is that there's light reflecting off here. It's not as obvious because even hard plastic has a little bit of it'll refract some of the light. You could also add a clear coat to it. That just says there's something on the outside of it. It's not really necessary. and you can add sheen to it, and you'll see, maybe some small changes here and there. Most of this stuff will not affect that though. All right, so in this case, that's really, so we did a base color, not necessary, and what we're looking for is, we're looking for no metallic and then no roughness, so that we're saying that light that hits this will behave in a way that's similar to the way it hits hard plastic. It'll absorb some, and that's all built into this principled shader. It'll absorb some, and then it will. So if you wanted to see the difference, you could see by adding back the diffuse shader, and we can take the color from here. We'll look at the hex color here, and just for example purposes. All right. So in this case, if I connect the dots here instead of the other one, notice what it does to the monkey. There's no shine. So the diffuse shader says, I'm not going to reflect any light at all. And so it's not exactly like hard plastic. It's not taking into account that even though it's the right color, there is some amount of light that reflects. So we'll get rid of that one, hit X. All right, so that really does hard plastic. Let's think about wood a little bit. So we'll slide over to our one that's supposed to resemble wood. And so in this case, we're going to look at our wood material. You could make the wood brown. So brown on this color scale is like a dark orange. So if you go somewhere in between red and yellow, and then make it darker, you'll see that color come through. So if you use a diffuse shader, yeah, it's kind of close, but let's take the hex value from this since I like that so much, and look at what happens if we use the principled. So I hit X to delete it, and then Shift A to add the principled shader, and I connect the dots to the surface, and I can add that color back in, so I don't have to find it again. And you'll notice it's a little different there. So wood obviously is very rough, and you get some other options that you could set here. So wood also in some cases has, if it's real thin, you can see through it. So if you wanted to give something along those lines, you could set the subsurface, and what that does is it's just like we talked about this in class. It's like shining a light through your ear. So it'll let some amount of light in. So if you watch closely, no light's going through the object, and then if you add a little bit, some light comes through. If you add a ton, the light is kind of going almost into the object itself. So you may see like a wooden lampshade or something might look like that, but realistically, the subsurface is not. That's, you might add a little bit to give the effect that wood has, but you probably wouldn't need a ton. So we'll reduce that down a little bit here. Most of the other things we won't need to do, but let's say you were adding some polish or finish to your object, you might add clear coat. And so what you get is you get this cool like difference of the outside has a reflective coating on it, and so that's the clear coat, and then the clear coat roughness. So if you wanted to match the wood, it would be all the way on. But in this case, we're saying, all right, the outside has no roughness, so it's reflecting, the light that hits it kind of reflects, but that's like the finish on the wood, and then the wood itself is very rough and doesn't reflect anything. So you get that nice combination of, this is what it would look like if you were looking at like a finished piece of wood, or a wood, something that was made of wood. And I really like that. Now it doesn't have the same texture as wood does. It doesn't have grains in it, but I think that's a good way to kind of map to wood. All right, let's go to We'll zoom out here and go over to our Chrome because that one is super easy to do here. Alright, so let's look at this Suzanne that's supposed to be our Chrome, or mirror, I think I called it. Alright, so there's our blue that we started with. Let's get rid of that. We kind of just know the principled shader is kind of the thing to add for this assignment. And we add the surface, connect the dots. Our base color we'll say is white, but we'll say that it's metallic. So in this case, white's probably not quite the color. We probably want something a little more gray. Yeah, okay, you can kind of see it coming through here. And then let's say our metal is, you don't want a rough mirror. It wouldn't reflect very well. So we turn the roughness all the way down, and now you see we've got this chrome Suzanne, and I mean, that's really all you need to do. You're saying it's made of metal, so it reflects all the light, and it's not rough at all. Now, over time, some metals will get a patina on them, and so this would be like an aged metal, but we want mirror or a chrome look, so we'll go with that. Super easy. Now to do that in before this principled shader, it would have required a few other nodes to accomplish that. All right, so now the one that everyone's been waiting for, the Jello. All right, so here's our Jello. Clearly we don't need this one because we need something that's see-through. So we hit X to get rid of it, Shift A to add the principled shader, and connect our dots. All right, so in this case now, I don't know what everyone's favorite color of Jello is, but we'll go ahead and do something. We'll do bright red Jello. I think that's the way to go. So now we kind of have seen subsurface. If we crank that all the way up, you get kind of a see-through, but we want Jello is really just see-through. So this option down here is transmission, and if you watch what happens if you transmit all the light that's going through, so it means light that's going through comes through the object. Transmit 1 means that I'm going to let all the light through, and so you can kind of see if you look closely, it's really letting a lot of the light through. Incidence of refraction for a typical object, it has some amount. If we set this to 1, we get a beautiful kind of clear object. So let's look through here. And then if we want to really clear it up, we can say that our subsurface, so we can look at that kind of might add some, but probably not a ton of clarity there. And so the reason it's not perfectly clear is it's got a little roughness. So let's take the roughness off, and look, you can see the other Suzanne through it. I think that's a pretty good approximation of Jello. The idea would be that the incident of refraction, or if you turn that up just a slight amount, what you'll get, that's too much. Let's say 1.2, you'll get a little bit more detail there, which I think, like, if you get Jello in a container, that's more what it looks like. So 1 means that it doesn't refract any at all. This one says that the light does refract just a little bit. You could even go as low as like 1.1, and it's going to be a little closer. You can kind of tweak those values, but overall, you can kind of see through it. The other thing we did in class that's kind of fun is you can actually put an emission shader like this, just like a light. So if we did a nice like pink glow coming out of the volume of it, then it's almost like it's glowing, and you may want to turn it down just a little bit, but you can get some really good effects that way. So this is saying the interior of this object is glowing this color at this strength. So I'm a big fan of that. And so then let's go back to our we want to set this one back to our mirror, this one back here, and that's essentially all 5 at once. And then the last thing that we did was um, we set, let me get a good angle here. So we wanted to set uh, the the smoothness of these different shapes. So we added, the last thing we did in class was to make it kind of look a little different. So we, in this case, we're kind of done with this node editor. We've got our textures here. Um, so we can go ahead and shrink that down. You don't need to see it as much, and you can see a little better this way. And then on the right hand side here, if you can't see it, you may need to stretch this window out. There's a little wrench, so I want to